It is key, though, that this growth needs to be used to ensure people can have an adequate standard of living. And I continue to encourage the lifting of sectorial sanctions to contribute to relieving the needs of the most vulnerable people in Venezuela. I do believe that individual sanctions can play an important role, but when you have sectorial sanctions, what happens is that the people who are the most vulnerable ones are the ones who are affected because there's not enough money for supporting the health system, the social protection system, the education, and so on. The Venezuelan government has announced reforms of certain systems that are important signs, like the justice system, the restructuring of the national police. They are promising steps, but they need to be implemented in a genuine and effective way to be able to address past human rights violations and particularly prevent their recurrence. And we are there in Venezuela to work on these issues. We continue to see some issues that we have been working with NGOs, with civil society, with families, and of course, we have been calling for the need of more open space of participation, of human rights defenders to have the freedom to defend whatever they need, and not the journalists that they can have the freedom, etc., etc. Trade unionists that have been detained that must be released, and the due process must be upheld. So we are in political dialogue with them as well. I mean, I think we believe that the political dialogue between the government and the opposition is encouraging, and I would like to call the parties to resume dialogue in good faith and also encourage the international community to continue supporting these initiatives. I hope that the conversations in Mexico can be resumed. In Nicaragua, yes, we have many people have been arrested in the context of the 2021 elections, and these are extremely concerning. And we have been calling the authorities to release all those arbitrarily detained. The government has continued to cancel the legal status of civil society organizations and universities, and we have also called authorities to restore those status because those organizations have been arbitrarily dissolved or sanctioned. And of course, there is a new law that concerns us a lot on NGO, further restricting the functioning of civil society contrary to the country's human rights obligations. I think Nicaragua must remain in the international agenda. Last March, the Human Rights Council adopted a resolution that allows my office to continue monitoring and reporting on the human rights situation in the country, and it has established a group of human rights experts with an accountability mandate in parallel to the mandate of my office. We are also being concerned about El Salvador, about the state of emergency, which led to more than 30,000 people being arrested, and the subsequent amendment to criminal law and criminal procedural law. I mean, we recognize, I have to say, I haven't been in office myself. I understand that security and how you deal with delinquency is a very, very tough issue. And I recognize the challenges posed by gang violence in El Salvador. But we have to do things not only, I mean, the intention can be good, but we have to do it in a way that you respect international human rights law. So, yes, a state has a duty to ensure security and justice, but should be done in compliance with international human rights laws. Another country
¿Qué
that I
haces,
could mention
Máximo
is Haiti,
Alejandro?
if I may. There is a rapid deterioration of the human rights situation in Haiti as a result of violent clashes between heavy armed gangs, rapidly expanding the control of their territory. And this is very concerning. And of course, there are ongoing discussion about the future format of the UN presence and mandate in Haiti. And I think it's paramount that the protection of Haitians' human rights is at the heart of the international response. So much more needs to be done to ensure security, protect the population, overcome structural institutional shortcomings, and establishing trust in public institutions. That is fundamental if we would like to democratize and consolidate rule of law, including the holding of peaceful and transparent elections.
There's so many countries. I think we could spend 20 minutes on each of those, and people will be fascinated to hear what you think. But let me just come back on Venezuela, because many people were surprised to see you recommend the lifting of sanctions last year against Venezuela, despite there not having been a significant improvement in the situation. And I noticed that there have been 93 incidents that your office has seen related to restrictions on Venezuela's civic and democratic space just since last autumn, and yet you've said again that you are in favor of lifting sanctions. Is that because you don't think they are the right tool for Venezuela? And do we use them too much in other places?
Well, as I mentioned before, Stephanie, we differentiate individual sanctions, sanctions to individual people who you could think are responsible for violation of human rights and they need to be held accountable, from sectorial sanctions. We are against sectorial sanctions, not only in Venezuela, everywhere. Because what happens in the sectorial sanctions usually hurt the poorest. In any country, you could have an authoritarian government, and they might have access to money. They won't be harmed probably if you do certain sectorial sanctions. But for the poorest, they depend on the production of oil, the production of coal, whatever the country is producing, on the possibility of having access to health, education. I did this documentation on 2020 on looking at COVID-19 responses. I mean, when a country has hospitals almost broken with very little resources, with few medical personnel and medical supply, these kind of sectoral sanctions were very complicated. But I have to tell you, when I visited Venezuela in 2019, I spoke to people who are not pro-government, mothers and doctors of hospitals, of children's hospitals, who were affected by the sanctions. Even though some sanctions are supposed not to include medicine, medical supplies, there is a lot of over-compliance. Banks do not want to risk anything, and so they do not provide the resources for the families to have access to that. So what happened, for example, I was speaking to some doctors. They have these children who needed a kidney transplant, and there was no possibility to do it in the country. So they were sending these children to Italy or Argentina, but the banks would send the money to those places, so they wouldn't accept them. And many children died because of that. So that's what I mean. I mean, when you are doing some sanction, you need to think exactly who you are impacting. And usually you don't impact the powerful, you impact the more vulnerable people. And
I think that you mentioned is very visible in Afghanistan, I know, and even despite the efforts to allow aid to continue to go through, as you say, people are very risk averse. Briefly, on the political prospects for Venezuela, what are you hoping will be the political solution? Do you think you can have a free and fair presidential election in 2024?
Well, I am a chronic optimistic, if I may say, because otherwise I will have to give up. I always use these words of Desmond Tutu, who used to say, I'm a prisoner of hope. And so I hope that parties will sit together understanding that they need to think on Venezuela as a whole and which could be the best political dialogue to ensure that in 2024 they are fair, transparent, and very participative elections. And I hope this will be resumed soon, so opposition and government can get into agreements that can give the minimal conditions for everybody to feel that that can be certain and that can be a process that could achieve the result that we all want, fair elections.
You mentioned the challenges of office, and it's certainly better that you are conscious in your criticisms that how challenging it is to be on the other side, the receiving end of these criticisms when you're in office. We have seen new governments come in on a wave of optimism in Peru, Ecuador, Honduras, and certainly your own native country, Chile, and very rapidly lose support. If you look at the new president of Chile, Gabriel Boric, he seems to have lost support very quickly, and he's coming in trying to fulfill very important goals and hopes and dreams. So as someone who's been very much in that situation, what's your advice to him? How can he come through on that optimism that brought him to power?
Well, I mean, first of all, and I spoke to him that when I was in Chile in summer, I told him there has been so huge expectation on your government from enormous amount of people. And I have to tell you, Mr. President, I told him, big expectations can never be met because usually they're unrealistic expectations because people want changes, but in a month, in 2 months. No? And particularly when you are thinking on issues that need sometimes more transformational changes, not just a small little thing. I mean, you can have goals that you can do in 6 months, but many of the more transformational changes will take a bit longer. But on the other hand, I think they had to deal with issues that are very challenging for any government. COVID-19, still COVID-19 pandemic, the economy with the COVID-19 and the consequences of COVID on the economy and the employment, and now the consequences of higher levels of inflation due to the war. So clearly, I think for any leader, this is a very challenging moment. I think, and of course, there is other issues that in all South America exists as well, like level of delinquency, the security issues, and so on. My only recommendation could be always speak openly to the people to explain the challenges and explain what you're going to do to address these challenges. But on the other hand, to explain that there are no magical solutions. So I think the possibility of ensuring that even though you might not have an instant solution to this problem because there are structural problems, it's not something that you can just solve with a new law, or even if a new law is fundamental, it will take time to have a new law. The other thing that has happened, I guess, is this all this process of a new Chilean constitution that's been going on created also a lot of expectations. It was good because the country through that has channeled the social outburst of 2019 in a democratic and participatory process, but also in something very interesting because it's completely paritarian. The 154 members of the Constitutional Assembly are 50-50 women and men, and that's just really new, and it means that a lot of processes have included the gender perspective and so on. But of course, it has taken time, and people want solutions now, want changes now, and it will be until the 4th of September, when there will be the referendum where this new constitution can be approved or not by the people. So I think they're leaving a lot of challenges.
Do you think it will be approved? Do you think it will be approved?
I hope it will be approved. I think it should be approved because, I mean, there's no, I haven't read the last document because it's not ready, it's just being worked out. I think it has a lot of good issues there, very important issues to solve some of the most important difficulties and challenges for our country in terms of ensuring that the whole regions of the country feel completely represented, that indigenous people feel completely represented, and how it can integrate better the international standards of human rights, like in housing, water, healthcare, and indigenous issues as well. And it's offering a new social contract based on plurinationality, legal pluralism, and interculturality. Some of the things sometimes for some people are not easy. I think one of the challenges that they have is to be able to communicate better to the people so people can understand what is it about, because some people are more concerned, of course, of working, having food, you know, the normal concerns of somebody, and not being able to get in touch in detail with these issues. But I think it's a great opportunity, and I hope it's approved.
You mentioned in relation to the gang violence in El Salvador, but there is a lot of violence and arson happening in the south of the country in Chile now between the extremist groups and the police. How can this young president handle that, reduce that amount of violence without falling into the kind of human rights violations that you've talked about in other countries?
Well, I think, as I said before, security is one of the main tasks of any government, of any state. It's not only the government, it's the state's responsibility to ensure protection to the people and to ensure security. And it can be done in compliance with humanitarian and human rights law. And of course, our office is always willing, if any institution wants to work with us in terms of ensuring how the way that they define their strategies, even their interventions, can be in compliance with the human rights law. So we have been doing that in other countries, and we have proposed, of course, to Chile, if they need any support on this area, or the UN country team as a whole can help in many of these issues, that they can help the government to identify which are the main areas that can be through dialogue, but also through firm decisions that have to be made to address these difficult issues.
So we're going to run out of time, but I had to ask you one question, especially given your record in speaking up for women's rights. We've had big demonstrations in the US this weekend over the potential for Supreme Court overturning abortion rights in many states in the US. When you look at the continent, some would say the biggest or one of the larger democratic deficits that's opening up is potentially in the US, with the constitution there becoming quite a polarizing force. Do you think the US should perhaps take a leaf out of Chile's book and have a constitutional convention, have some kind of way to address this deficit?
Well, let me tell you first that the leaked document from the US Supreme Court does not constitute a final decision from the court. And I think that possible decisions taken at the national level in the US to revert more than 5 decades of protection of sexual and reproductive health and rights through Roe and Wade are very concerning. And we're really concerned at that because we believe it could be a massive setback for women's rights, contrary to the international human rights standards. Millions of women in the US could be affected by the decision, especially those with low income and belonging to racial and ethnic minorities, because evidence shows that highly restrictive laws have a disproportionate impact on marginalized group of women, in particular women living in poverty. Globally, unsafe abortion is a leading cause of maternal death. And evidence has shown that restrictive abortion laws do not reduce incidence of abortion, but drive it underground, making it more likely to be unsafe. Do the US needs a constitutional process? Well, I'm not sure there is appetite there for that. And I suppose are the American citizens the one who needs to answer that? Because I know Constitution can open many other issues that maybe they don't want to open right now in the discussion. But I hope in this issue that that women's rights can be respected, because we do believe that everybody can have options, choices. And what states need to ensure is that women have those options. What state cannot do is to impose a certain perspective, but needs to ensure that all women, according to their own beliefs, religion, or decisions on their own autonomy, on their bodies and so on, can have access to all the different options. That's what a state should ensure, and not to try to ensure that some things are not available, particularly to the most vulnerable and poorest and marginalized groups of people in the country.
United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, Dr. Michelle Bachelet, thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Please welcome Peter T. Grauer, Chairman of Bloomberg LP.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Grauer, the Executive Chairman of Bloomberg, and I am very pleased to be introducing the next panel on entrepreneurship economy. One of the most incredible things about Latin America over the past few years has been to witness so many of its cities emerge as hotbeds of innovation and entrepreneurship. As we build back after the devastating coronavirus pandemic, it will be these digital startups, disruptors, and innovators that lead the way across education, finance, healthcare, and a range of other industries. But can we, to borrow a phrase popular in the US, build back better? Can we put equity, diversity, and inclusion at the heart of our new vanguards of industry? Can we serve women better and bring them to the highest levels of corporate decision-making? Can we build not just economic wealth, but social wealth also? I hope the answer to my questions is a resounding yes. As a data-driven company, Bloomberg is always looking for ways to measure progress and identify areas for improvement. This was the guiding principle behind the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, the GEI, which we launched in 2016 and which today represents the most comprehensive investment quality data source on gender equality in the world. The GEI embodies two of Bloomberg's key missions, bringing transparency to the opaque and creating diverse and inclusive work environments for all. By providing objective, aggregate data on areas like policies and products geared towards women, we can draw new insights and I hope achieve a much greater impact. And in recognizing the firms that are succeeding, we are pulling back the curtain on how they are driving change and creating a benchmark for best practices and effective policies for promoting women. Of course, the equality conversation involves not only women, but also people of different ethnicities, nationalities, sexual orientations, and religions. It also means supporting our coworkers that live with mental health issues or other disabilities. I stress this point because it's one that can often get lost in the diversity dialogue. As leaders, we need to reflect on whether our resources and efforts are impacting all, not just some. In order to create companies that are truly inclusive, we must take a holistic approach to diversity. One of the issues we've been focused on at Bloomberg has been the growing body of increasingly convincing data and research that shows companies which encourage diversity and are inclusive in their culture enjoy much better business results. It's become clear to me that bringing in a wide variety of employees isn't just about doing the right thing for individuals. It is also about doing the right thing for corporations, and it is a business imperative. Especially today, when the fight for the best people is greater than ever, companies must embrace inclusion to access the widest pool of talent. Diversity and inclusion, in short, are no longer merely ethical imperatives. They are business and economic necessities. And with this as our North Star, I'm delighted to welcome our panelists and moderator, Bloomberg Businessweek Carol Massar, to the stage for the next panel discussion, the entrepreneurship economy.
Please welcome Angelica Fuentes, founder and president, MoveUp, Mate Pence, founder and co-CEO, Loft, Sumita Pandit, chief operating officer, dLocal, and Bloomberg's Carol Massar.
Good morning. We have an incredible panel to talk about the startup community in Latin America, entrepreneurship in general. They were just introduced. Right next to me on stage, though, is Angelica Fuentes. She's founder and president of MoveUp. And as Eric Schatzker said at the beginning, we all are learning to adapt in this world, so sometimes we do things virtually. And so I'm so delighted to have with us, we have Mate Pence, who's co-founder and co-CEO of Loft. Mate, welcome. And also Sumita Pandit, she's chief operating officer of dLocal. So I just want to set the stage in terms of what we have seen when it comes to the startup community in Latin America. This is a Bloomberg story that just ran. For a hot second, there was no better place for entrepreneurs seeking financing than Latin America. Startups based in Latin America raised $16.3 billion last year. That's more than the entire preceding decade, making it the region the world's fastest growing for venture funding. But just as quickly as the money poured in, we saw it drying up. We also saw a record number of venture capital deals in 2020. Now, some are forecasting about a 70% drop in private investments in the Latin America region this year compared with last year. So the world changes fast, we know this. So we've got this great panel. So I want to get to it. And Sumita, I want to start with you and dLocal. You guys were the first unicorn to hail from Uruguay. You went public last year. You all thought about staying private. How glad are you that you didn't stay private and you went public last year versus the volatility that you might have faced this year?
Thanks, Carol. It's great to be here. And again, I apologize I could not make it in person, but it's great to be part of this panel, and thank you for having me. Carol, to your specific question, what I would say is that when we took this decision last year, obviously, we did not have a crystal ball and we did not know how much volatility is going to be there in the market. Having said that, we knew that going public went beyond a short-term objective for us. We knew that going public gave us quite a lot of advantages, including making sure that more investors as well as clients got to know about dLocal. So we are super glad we went public last year. We think despite the volatility in the public markets, we think going public allows companies to have access to capital on a more long-term basis. It provides credibility. It provides you a reputation, a branding, and all of those factors really go beyond the short-term objective of just raising capital. So we are absolutely thrilled that we went public last year and that we have access to public capital markets on a go-forward basis.
Angelica, I want to bring you into the conversation because you have dLocal who's public. You're on the other end of the spectrum. You're making microloans for women predominantly. They're small loans, but it's not just about the money. You're also providing education and mentorship and guidance. Tell me about the activity that you're doing and how much demand you're seeing.
Right. So I think that one of the things that women, especially women at the bottom of the economic ladder, are missing is training programs. It's, most of the microcredit loans are given to women and they stay basically flat in the same place where they started because what they think is that they need to just cover the expenses that they have, at hand. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've realized and that I saw years ago was that when you gave women financial literacy, when you give women the possibility of getting ahead personally, when they start believing in who they are, what they can do, then they make the sky become the limit. And so to me, it was very important to give them, access to finances, which they usually don't. By the way, in Latin America, 52% of women are not, banked at all, which is huge globally. And I think this is a number that I was shocked at.
They're not served.
They're not served, right. Globally, there's 1.7 billion adults who are not banked at all.
It's remarkable.
Out of those 1.7, 1.1 are women. 1.1 billion, are women, which is it's a staggering number. And so to me, what was important was not just giving them credit, but also providing financial literacy. And on top of that, giving them programs to train them to understand who they were so they can move ahead. What's happened with that is that the women don't just stay, in a very basic place, but they know because they learn to believe in themselves, they are okay with taking risks. Mm-hmm. They learn that it's okay for them to be ambitious, which is something that in Latin America, if you're a woman, you do not even think that ambition is something for you. So to me, that's very important. It's a process. It is a process, yes.
Mate, I want to bring you into this conversation. So I mentioned dLocal, public. You have Angelica, who's working on the microloans. You guys, still private. You've raised a lot of money over the last couple of years. Remind me about the ease that you've had in terms of access to credit.
Yeah, and thanks for having us all on here, Carol. Even though it's in a hybrid format, but it's great to be present, and it's we're looking at here is as we zoom out, we're looking at a landscape where over the last decade or so, there has been an exponential inflow in Latin America, capital-wise. And certainly over the last couple of years, there's been a very large spike. You mentioned it sort of for a hot second. There was a big influx. You could say that the party sort of started late here and ended together with the rest of the world. And I think when I zoom out here, I've been operating as an entrepreneur for about a decade in Brazil, and I would say that over the last couple of years, access to credit, access to equity, access to capital markets more broadly has definitely been more democratized, but we're still extremely sort of early innings compared to anything else that I've seen elsewhere in the world. So when we look at sort of venture funding as a percentage of GDP, both in Brazil and across Latin America more broadly, we're talking about a small fraction of the penetration that you would see in markets like the US, markets like China, or even other emerging markets like India and Southeast Asia. So kind of when I look at not just our specific case, but when I look at the market more broadly, I think that, that there has been a sort of blip on the screen over the last few years in acceleration, but certainly I'd say that on a long arc, there's still a long way to go to close the gap versus kind of more global averages of venture funding and just democratization of the credit and equity ecosystem for startups. Now, what does that mean in terms of the companies that operate, whether it's early stage companies or whether it's late stage companies or even private companies? I think it means that what you're actually finding today in the region are companies that by design or by definition are a lot more resilient. Whether they were born in the last couple of years or whether they were born a decade ago, companies just had to survive in an environment of scarcity, in an environment of kind of relative adversity too. When we started the company, when we started Loft in 2018, Brazil was in a deep recession and was looking like it'd be coming out of that recession in 2019 or 2020. 2020, we saw COVID hit. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of operators across the region, a lot of companies, when you look at sort of the financial health and you look at sort of their capitalization, these are companies that structurally just had to deal with much more scarcity. I think that, again, lots of companies, us included, have been able to tap capital markets publicly or privately quite well in the recent past, but I don't think that sort of fundamentally changed the hardwired DNA, if you will, of the entrepreneurs and operators in the region that just have to operate in a more frugal fashion. And I think you see that with companies like the local, going public and doing so with a much more robust business model than perhaps some of the markets that just are a lot more flush with capital. So I think the point I want to make is that on a relative basis, we did see a significant influx, but this influx is on a relative basis very little compared to what we saw in the US and elsewhere. And I think hence, as we look forward over the next couple of years, there might be a sort of absolute decline versus these last few years, but we should, on a relative basis, see more interest in the region compared to other markets.
I have, sorry to interrupt. I would like to know, you're talking about the capital markets and the money that's needed. There's a gap of around $93 billion between the financing that companies of women get versus men. Women usually only get around $500,000 for their startups, where men get $12 million on their startups. Is there anything that can be considered, for women to also be a part of getting, more capital? Because I think that's...
Sumita, I want to bring you back into this because you were a banker at JP Morgan for about 18 and a half years, and you were helping, targets be found and connect investors with opportunities. I mean, what is it? Why is there still such disconnect when it comes to providing money for the underserved, and in particular for women?
I think there are multiple reasons for that. I think in most cases, what we saw, and I would say this is more when I was an agent and was trying to connect what I would call founders with capital sources. What we saw was that there was a big impact because of the networks that people lived in. A lot of the capital raises that happened in the earlier stages of a company's life journey typically happen from friends and family, who you network with, what's your immediate circle makes a huge difference to where you end up taking your company. I do think that that's changing. I think there is more structured and purposeful investment criteria that investors are using today. And this brings into question an important point, which is close to my heart, which is about how purposeful should it be? Should investors have more specific guidelines as to where and how they invest? Or should it be really driven by just a profit motive? And I think that's the social question we need to understand as we think about investors. Most investors are driven by a profit motive. There is no other motive. But sometimes just a profit motive is not the best motive when it comes to where capital is actually flowing in the short term. And I think when there is abundant capital, it becomes easier to go after social causes. I think as capital tightens, it's going to actually become harder for some of the social causes to get funded. And that's going to be an important question. And I'm curious to hear Angelica's views on this. You're very close to this, Angelica. But I would think that if capital actually becomes more constrained, it's going to be harder to do good than to make money.
Is it becoming harder? And let me just remind everybody, if you have questions, please submit them to the Bloomberg New Economy app. We'd love to hear from you. So is it becoming tougher already as capital?
It is becoming tougher. The thing is that I believe, and to your point about are people going to, or investors going to do just, a for-profit company to invest in, I think that the younger generations are a lot more creative on finding solutions for social problems that we face today. So I think there's a lot more companies out there, startups out there that are for profit, for purpose. So in that respect, I think we're changing the mind frame about doing things. I've been working on women's issues for a little over 30 years of my life. And to me, it's very important, this creativity that women have. And most of the ones that at least I personally know have those two concepts within the startups. They want to do good because it's something great for environment or for women themselves, or well,
they see a direct need, right? And
but but it's also a for-profit company, and I think that we're seeing those two linked together a lot more. But yes, definitely there is a restriction of capital going into companies.
One thing I wanted to ask the three of you is, what is it that you think the world needs to understand about Latin America as an incubator for innovation and ideas? And, Mate, come on back in. I mean, you could have, you yourself have lived around the world, right? And I just wonder, why is it that you chose to start your company up in Latin America, specifically in Brazil? What was it about Brazil that made you want to do it?
Yeah, I think it actually really connects with, point around diversity and gender equality and generally just the depth of the opportunity set that we see in Brazil and Latin America. I was really, really excited to solve hard and big problems. Now, it's not that, other places around the world don't offer hard problems or big opportunities, but I felt that, you could really, especially when it comes to bringing technology and innovative, new ways of doing things to bear, the Latin American ecosystem is just, really underfunded and short on innovation. So I think that's what attracted me initially. That's what kept me here for over a decade, and certainly, there is an increasing kind of ecosystem of foreign founders or foreign founder-led companies. Also, a lot of cross-fertilization. One of the largest companies that went public here in Brazil last year, Nubank, is led by a non-Brazilian. So I think that there, over the last decade or so, there's been recognition that there's a lot of opportunity in bringing technology to bear. And you're talking about less incremental improvements. You're really talking about fundamentally changing people's lives. And I think, just connecting a little bit to the point around opportunities for women and investment in female-led companies. I've invested in over 150 companies, both personally and also through Canary, which is a seed stage fund that I helped co-found and co-create here in Brazil. And one of the challenges that we have is, even if you put a pure profit motive aside, for now, we're missing a pipeline. We're missing a more fertile ecosystem of female-led companies. So there is still a chicken and egg problem, to which I think part of the solution are actually the companies or the later stage companies themselves. So one of the things that we're doing at Loft is, we have a stated goal of gender equality across the company, but not just for the company as a whole. I think it's relatively easy to say that you have 50% women, 50% men across the company, but women in leadership positions, which then becomes a feeder into women that are well educated, that are well trained, and have the ability and the financial wherewithal to step aside and say, I've worked here for a couple of years and I would love to start my own company. And we're starting to see that. We're still talking about small numbers, but I think that this last cycle of innovation, which frankly was mostly led, at least at the top of the pyramid, by male founders, male CEOs, is now seeing a kind of second wave of female-led executive ranks who, this is my hope, certainly will go out there and start companies on their own. We're certainly encouraging that proactively. We're investing behind that. It's very early days, but I think it's not just incumbent upon the investors. It's also incumbent upon the companies that are being successful in scaling to strengthen that as they promote gender equality across the board.
And if I may jump in here with some quick comments, Carol, I think that as a public company, I can talk about what we do at dLocal. So, if you look at our strategy, we have been very focused on emerging markets. We typically get the question, why don't you expand your business into the US or in Europe? And we have very purposefully chosen to stay focused in emerging markets because we think there is a huge opportunity. We think that we are really solving a hard problem, which is how do merchants accept payments from each and every consumer that lives in emerging markets? They may not have access to a credit card, but they may have an access to a wallet. Should they therefore not be able to use their wallet to buy a product or a service that a user in the developed market has always had access to? That's really the question that we are trying to get a solution to, and we remain focused on emerging markets as a result. We've also, just like Nate mentioned, we have very proactively gone out and hired women in senior roles. So, for example, our head of account management, our head of compliance, our head of legal, our head of IR, they're all women. And I think that I won't say we are looking out and hiring women as the only option, but when we are looking out to hire people, we give men and women an equal chance. If you're good, you get the job. And I think that actually helps society. Because I think as more and more women come into these jobs, we are hoping that in 10 years, 15 years from now, dLocal becomes a platform from where multiple founders emerge.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, and I wish we had more time because when it's virtual, it's a little bit tougher. But the idea of looking at Latin America and the ideas that start here, whether or not they can be exportable to the rest of the world. And I do look at what dLocal's doing. You're working with Amazon, you're working with Microsoft. I mean, you're looking at connecting the emerging world and spreading out. But, Angelica, when you look at what you are doing, the work, can we apply this elsewhere? And should the rest of the world be looking at it and figuring it out? I mean, microloans are global.
Right. Well, it's not just on microloans. I think, and
the educational
education. I think there's a lot of things because there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of innovation, and innovation,
But what is in particular about the Latin American market that you think people are maybe missing, especially when it comes to the startup world?
I think Latin America can export a lot of things when it comes to technology. For example, one of the things that I was doing some research on what was it that people in Latin America were doing, especially, the younger generations. There's a lot of gaming. There's a lot of augmented reality. There's, a lot of animation. So definitely there is a lot to be exported. This morning I was just, talking to this man from Colombia who started a small outsourcing for call centers in Colombia, in a small place in Colombia, and now they're all over the world. So yes, there's definitely a lot of talent and innovation that can be exported, outsourcing services in different parts of the world.
Sumita, do you think in terms of the money that we saw, the incredible amount of money that came in last year, do you think we'll see it again?
I absolutely think so. I think for those of us who work long enough, we've seen these cycles come and go. I think if you go back to the 2008 to 10 crisis, the world felt like it was coming to an end. And yet that phase actually produced some of the best technology companies that came up today and the products that we use today. I think that, cycles are good. It helps you go through these ups and downs to actually strengthen your business model. And, there will be some companies that will not survive the capital constraint that will probably come in the next few quarters. But I'm absolutely certain that the cycle will turn and we will again see, abundant availability of capital as things improve.
Well, one of the questions that's coming from the audience and asked about the capital, whether or not the flows will come back, what sectors pose the biggest opportunity? I want to ask all of you, but let me start with you, Sumita. I mean, what sectors do you think in Latin America do present the biggest opportunity for investors?
I think that, and maybe I'm biased, but I do think that any product that makes financial services more available, just given how unbanked the population is, I think is a sector that's going to continue to see a lot of opportunity. I think we are literally just scratching the surface of that opportunity in Latin America. So I think broadly financial services. I would also highlight education as a very big opportunity in Latin America. And I think that is a place where social policies could make a huge difference to how the region evolves, create the technology talent that the region needs, and can we then export this talent to the rest of the world? So I do think that education as a sector should and will attract a lot of investment because one, it's the right thing to do. Second, I think social policies align when it comes to education. Third, there's money to be made. And that's like the perfect combination.
Mate, what about your thoughts in terms of the best opportunities here in Latin America? What sectors in particular?
Yeah, look, I think that we're in the very early innings of essentially sort of fundamentally disrupting large chunks of GDP here in Latin America. I think when we look at the stock exchange in Brazil, for example, we see that the average age of a company is close to 100 years. And that is because there's a lot of large sectors, be it real estate, be it healthcare, be it education, be it infrastructure, are just fundamentally today kind of hardwired in an analog fabric. And I think that technology brings a lot of efficiency, brings a lot of democratization to these sectors. So, we're obviously working to do that within real estate, but I'm seeing similar opportunities, especially in healthcare and in education as well. I think healthcare is one of those sectors that, I think we're really just scratching the surface in Latin America, and we're seeing tons of interesting startups that have benefited, frankly, from this boom over the last few years of capital influx. And I didn't see a lot of healthcare startups in kind of prior waves. So I think that a lot of the kind of Internet 2.0 or technology 2.0 companies that require more complex operations that have regulatory trappings, trappings and opportunities attached to it. Those are the sectors that will get disrupted and I think pose a ton of opportunity because, again, I think there's a lot of underlying GDP there that, frankly, currently today in many of these markets is being owned by incumbents that are oftentimes slow to react and act in sort of oligopolistic fashion. And I think, again, fintech was probably the first inning, and now we're seeing that expands to other massive sectors of the underlying economies.
Mate, just because we're Bloomberg, in case you want to break some news, do you have any plans to go public anytime soon?
No comment.
Last question, just got about 30 seconds. What else could we do to help your community, which is when you're talking about a loan of a couple $1,000s or a small loan, what else could be done to help that?
Well, access to credit is definitely one of the most important ones. Education, it's basic. It's not just the good thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do for both men and women, especially in countries in Latin America. I think there's a huge space for people to be investing in. You were talking about investing in health, but also in wellness. I think there's one that, especially with the women that I work with, even though crypto is not the best lately, this last time, but it's something I think that people should think about, crypto economy. And there is $96 billion that get transferred into Latin American countries through remittances. No, ¿cómo se dice? remittance,
Remittance.
yes. And, the traditional way of doing it, they're very high commissions, the rate of exchange, sometimes it's not the best, there's a cap. Once crypto gets a little, better stated there, I think that will be another big, huge opportunity for people to do in Latin America. But for women, it's definitely access to credit, training programs, mentoring, networking. There's just
it's a suite of
so
things.
much to do. Yes.
Angelica, thank you so much. Mate and Sumita, we appreciate them as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Please welcome Tom Orlik, Chief Economist, Bloomberg Economics.
Sí, no sé qué es porque además tampoco funciona con los para las encuestas.
If I were one of you sitting out there in the audience, I'd have two questions right now. Question one, what do crocodiles have to do with what we're discussing at this new economy event? Question two, why is there a British guy standing on this stage in Panama offering to tell us about lessons from Asia? Well, to get an answer to your first question, I'm afraid you're going to have to wait till near the end of my presentation. I know, suspense, it's difficult, but I can give you an answer to the second question right now. You see, the sun may have set on the British Empire, but the sun will never set on British people's ironclad confidence that we can step off a plane anywhere in the world and tell the locals how to run their affairs better than they know how to do themselves. Welcome to my presentation. So, in the last 40 years, there's been a really important mega trend in the global economy. And you can see it vividly illustrated in this chart. It's the rise of Asia. Back in 1980, Asia accounted for a small share of global GDP. In 2020, they account for almost half of global GDP. And by 2050, based on current trajectories, they'll be by far the largest contributor. So I've spent much of the last 20 years living in Asia, in Beijing, in Shanghai, and Hong Kong, and traveling to Tokyo and Seoul and Singapore. So what I'm going to try and do today is distill some of the lessons from the Asian economic miracle and think about how those lessons could help Panama, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and other countries in Latin America seize what I think is an important moment of economic opportunity. So what are those lessons? I have four. Lesson one, an effective government can be a powerful driver of development. That's a lesson which we've forgotten in the West. We've forgotten that it was a government program which put a man on the moon. We've forgotten that it was government-funded research and development which laid the foundation for the entrepreneurial successes of Silicon Valley. But in Asia, the thread that weaves together the economic miracles in Japan and Korea and Taiwan and mainland China is the idea of an effective developmental state. A government which focuses on development, not today, not tomorrow, not just today, not just tomorrow, but for months and years and decades. And as you can see in this chart, Asian governments are some of the most effective in the world, and they continue to get better at delivering on development, delivering on increased prosperity and opportunity for their people. Now, when you have a developmental state, you can set policy for the long term. And when we think about the changes that really make a difference for economic development, the policies that really increase wealth and opportunity, they're almost always long-term policies. Investment in education, investment in infrastructure, investment in research and development. These are all policies which cost money, sometimes a lot of money today, but can pay enormous dividends in the years and decades ahead. And in Asia, they have made those long-term investments in abundance. And you can see one aspect of that illustrated in this chart. In 1950, Asian workforces didn't have much education. In 2015, following decades of investment by government, by households, decades of hard work by children, Asian economies have some of the most educated and high-skilled workforces in the world. And of course, that is a driver of wealth, opportunity, and prosperity. Now, if you're thinking long-term, there's something else which is really important that you have to do. You can dream big, but the lesson from Asia is that you have to start small. Now, Asian economies haven't always got that right. Think about China in the early days of the People's Republic, the era when Chairman Mao was in charge. China was so ambitious to quickly overtake the British and the United States as an industrial power that they tried to run before they could walk. They tried to manufacture complicated, difficult things before they could manufacture simple things. And as a consequence, they wasted decades of development opportunity. It wasn't until Deng Xiaoping took over in 1979 that China absorbed the lesson of dreaming big, but starting small. And by focusing on developing competitive strength in simple manufactures, textiles, toys, tchotchkes, China was able to grab the first link in the global value chain and start accelerating up the ranks. And that process of incremental development is what's left China and other Asian economies today in command of some of the most valuable parts of the global manufacturing industry. And you can see that illustrated for electronics in this chart. So all of those lessons are important, but they pale into insignificance compared to the final lesson which Asia has for Latin America. Don't get eaten by a crocodile. Now, what does that mean in economic terms? Well, in China, they have a word for financial speculators. They have a name for the kind of highly leveraged hedge funds which make destabilizing bets on a country's currency, tipping it into financial crisis and recession. They call those financial speculators big financial crocodiles, or Da Jinrong Eryu in Chinese. And such is the fear about the rapacious appetite of financial crocodiles that Asian economies have built formidable defenses. They run a current account surplus. They avoid borrowing in foreign currencies. They build up foreign exchange reserves as a defense against speculative attacks. And as a consequence of that, if you bring together all of the indicators which show vulnerability to speculative attacks, vulnerability to financial crises, Asian economies are some of the most resilient in the world. And what that means is that in Asia, there aren't so many financial crises, there aren't so many recessions, and there's that stability, which is the crucial basis of planning for long-term development. Now, Asia's had enormous success in the last 40 years, and a lot of that success has been down to good policy and hard work. But part of it has also been the consequence of happy circumstance, good luck for Asian economies. And there's two components to that happy circumstance. First, Asian economies could benefit from open access to global markets. China could export to the United States, export to the United Kingdom, export to Europe. Secondly, at the beginning of their industrialization process, Asian economies were really cheap. Wages were low, and that gave them a crucial competitive advantage. Both of those circumstances are now changing fast. In the United States, there's growing suspicion, growing hostility toward the rise of China. The Trump administration put 25% tariffs in place. The Biden administration has left those tariffs in place. And Asia is no longer a cheap place to manufacture. As you can see in this chart, wages in China are about to rise higher than wages in most major Latin American economies. That deglobalization process, combined with the higher cost of doing business in Asia, I think adds up to an important moment of strategic opportunity for Latin America. How can Latin America seize that opportunity? Well, I'm excited to hear the conversations and the ideas at this Bloomberg New Economy Gateway event, but I also think it's important that Latin America absorb the lessons of Asia's economic miracle. Focus the government on long-term development. Make investments in education, in infrastructure, in R&D. Dream big, but start small. And most important of all, whatever you do, don't get eaten by a crocodile. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Marcelo Claure, Chairman and CEO, Claure Capital, former CEO, SoftBank Group International, and Bloomberg's Juan Pablo Spinetto.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I'm very excited about this conversation with one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the history of Latin America, Marcelo Claure. Marcelo, I want to start asking you, you said several times recently about how this is Latin America's decade, right? This is the golden area for Latin America. And, you know, this contrasts with political instability, low growth, difficulties coming out of the pandemic. I want to ask you, why are you so optimistic about Latin America?
Hi, thanks for having me, JP, and apologies for not being in Panama. I had every intention to make it there, but with COVID, I had to stay back, so apologies for that. I'm a huge believer in Latin America because we've seen what we've been able to do these last 3 years. And these last 3 years have been remarkable for myself as we started deploying capital into Latin American entrepreneurs, and we were able to get, you know, even in these difficult times, we've been able to get amazing returns for SoftBank as we launched a Latin American fund. And I think these last few years were tough in Latin America due to the fact that I think we went into the crisis, financial crisis, a little bit earlier, right? I mean, and now you're seeing Brazil, I would say, emerge, you know, faster than the rest of the world from the crisis because they went ahead and they raised interest rates ahead of the rest, and you're starting to have a more solid, I would say, solid economy and solid currency. So I think we're going to be okay as it relates to that. But what really excites me about Latin America is, you know, and maybe I shouldn't be excited because, you know, we're huge believers in globalization of the economy, but I think everything that's going on from a geopolitical perspective, it is basically forcing a lot of the manufacturers to rethink their efficiency, global strategy to manufacture, and start looking at Latin America as a potential great place for manufacturing. One is obviously labor costs have not risen as fast as they have risen in China, but more importantly, we've learned our lessons, and once you have one single supply chain that is based in China, a lot can go wrong. And forget geopolitical, just look at the things that have happened to the supply chain through COVID and all that. So I do believe that you're going to have a lot of manufacturing move to Latin American countries, especially Mexico and some Central American countries. And when you do that, then you're basically having capital flowing into the economy that wasn't there before. And I believe Mexicans are as capable as anybody else in terms of manufacturing, you know, all sort of goods that will come into the economy. So I think that's a very positive thing that will happen to Latin America. And then secondly, we're in the middle of what I like to call the EV revolution, the electric vehicle revolution, and the US has made some pretty bold commitments. General Motors have made commitments as it relates to most of the cars by 2035 are going to be electric vehicles. Well, today, electric vehicles, one of the main components is the battery. It's anywhere between 20 to 30% of the cost of an electric vehicle is in the batteries. And what goes into the batteries to electric vehicles, the most important commodity in this case is lithium. And if you look at, mainly three countries, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, Bolivia on its own controls 30% of all the lithium reserves in the world. So you're going to see countries that potentially, haven't performed so well economically like Bolivia and Argentina, who just by having the right, commodity, have an incredible potential in the future. And I'm saying Bolivia just because I'm Bolivian, but Mexico will be a good producer of lithium, and the rest of the countries have additional copper. They have other parts that are important. So when you look at commodities that are going to be incredibly important, again, what's happening in Ukraine didn't help, the world, but, price of commodity will be on an all-time high. And this, to me, is going to last for a while. With the potential of manufacturing and supply chain, there's going to be a good inflow of capital to Latin America that we haven't had in the last few years. So this is why I believe that this is going to be great. And I will say lastly, Latin America was always behind. When I was investing in Latin America the last 3 years, it was relatively easy to invest because what you were seeing was Latin America was 10 years behind China from a technological disruption point of view. And when you have such a damaged physical infrastructure, then the technology disruption is much bigger. And we have started that, and we're seeing how well the Latin American tech companies are performing. Forget valuations for a second in terms of how they're growing and how they're changing the way people live. That I think, is going to be incredibly positive, and we're going to continue to see, the rise of an entrepreneurial community that was pretty much dead. So I look at all those things, and I like what I see from a Latin American perspective.
Marcelo, let me ask you about the recent sell-off in the market with the Fed tightening. We see tech companies' valuations falling 50, 60, 70%. What you make of it, and where you see opportunities, what industries you like?
So one is, you cannot judge investment that have been made in the last 2 years. You got to judge on what has happened to valuation of these technology companies in the last 10, 12 years, and they still remain the best investments that have been made. So you cannot just look, oh my God, look what happened this last year and how much things have dropped. I mean, we've been living in a market which technology companies have been driving most of the valuation rise of all the stock market. So we cannot just say what has happened now. Yes, there's an adjustment. I think we've been operating with as close as free money as you can. And therefore, when there's free money, there's a lot of money that flows into venture-backed companies who basically are utilizing this capital to grow. And I think, things are going to be tighter now. I think entrepreneurs are going to be forced to drive profitability faster, to focus more on profitable growth. But to me, this is just a phase. This is a cycle. I mean, nothing is going to change. We're living today. I always tell people that the next 5 to 10 years are going to be the most exciting years that human mankind has ever experienced. To me, it's very simple. Every single industry vertical and every single function within a company is being digitized. So I call it the next era, the disruption of everything and the digitization of everything. So you cannot go against those trends where, AI combined with people make the world more efficient. So therefore, nothing is going to change from a level of disruption, innovation, and all that. Valuations to me are temporary. It will take time. Companies will adjust, and great companies are going to continue to be made, and technology is going to continue to drive innovation. So I don't see this. To me is temporary, and if you got caught buying stocks at a high price in the last 2 years, you're paying now. If you bought the same stocks 5, 6 years ago, you look at your returns and you're doing great. And if you're an investor with fresh capital, I would say, or fresh powder, or dry powder, I don't think there has been. Now is going to be the time where there's going to be great investments because companies are going to be at a different valuation, and you're going to be able to ride another great wave.
Won't the higher interest rates in the U.S. affect the venture capital scene in Latin America?
I mean, it will to a certain point, but great disruptive companies are being made, and we live it every single day where technology is. Tech companies are great disruptors and founders of innovation. So there's going to be less capital available. I would say that's fair. We've gone from $2 billion a year to $20 billion a year of venture capital into Latin America. I don't think we're ever going to go back what I like to call the dark ages, which was before 2018, where Latin America had $1.5 billion, while India had 10, and Southeast Asia had 10. I think at least we're going to be the same as in India or the same as Southeast Asia, and there's going to be plenty of capital. Maybe we won't have as much as the last 2 years. And the reason why there was so much capital the last 2 years is we had a lot to catch up. There had been such a lack of investment, but I know we're way better off than we were in the last 2 years. So for great companies, there's always going to be capital, and there's going to be a less need for capital as companies focus on profitability and cash flow generation at a faster pace than they had in the last 2 years, because there's going to be less capital than there was before.
Marcelo, let me ask you about you. I understand that you're starting your family office. What are the targets, the goals? Where do you want to go with that?
So, as you know, I was the CEO of SoftBank International for many years, and what I decided to quit my job and focus on doing stuff for myself. And today I'm focused on, we're lucky that we're living, 3 revolutions at the same time. I like to call it the AI revolution. Then you're having the electric vehicle revolution, which Latin America is going to play a key role. And then lastly, we're having a blockchain revolution, in which you're going to see a disruption of the financial market. So those are 3 incredible areas that we're putting a lot of focus. And, we're starting by investing in funds, we're investing in companies, and we're going to just figure out how we can find amazing founders, that have an incredible potential to disrupt. And we're going to continue doing similar businesses that I've been lucky to be part of the last 10 years.
Unfortunately, I only have time for one more. I want to hear your thoughts about crypto. You are a big supporter of crypto, but what you make of the recent turbulence in the market? Is people starting to lose faith?
Again, it depends when you got in, right? If you were lucky to get in when let's talk about Bitcoin. To me, is just one little piece of the blockchain ecosystem. Today we live in an economy that's basically controlled by central intermediaries, call it Google, Facebook, JP Morgan, etc. And basically they have a closed ledger, in which, in the case of Facebook, they control identity. In the case of Google, they control pretty much every website. In the case of JP Morgan and big banks. And you're going to move to a decentralized world where there's going to be no need for, people who basically charge a toll every time you go by. And we're going to move into a peer-to-peer exchanges where we're going to be able to transact directly. I'm going to be able to share my identity directly with you, and I'm going to be able to send money directly with you without the need of intermediaries. So to me, that is the fundamental change that we're going to see. Again, Bitcoin is just one iteration of what this will be, but there will be many more iterations, whether in earlier stage. And one rule of thumb that I've always followed of where to deploy capital is where are the smartest people moving into. And there's not a single day where you don't have the smartest people graduating from the best universities that are joining these crypto disruptors that are, that have incredible plans to continue to disrupt financial systems and others. So I love the concept behind blockchain, and crypto is one piece of it, and Bitcoin is just another piece of it. This is way bigger, and I think this is going to dominate the next 10 to 15 years.
So those fundamentals don't change?
Absolutely not. I mean, anytime you can disrupt, so if I can send money directly to you without the need to have an intermediary, which technology allows you to do it, then that in the long run is going to win. Of course, there's going to be incumbents that are going to fight, they're going to try to protect their territory, but that's the law of life. I mean, I look at, hey, nobody believed in Uber day one. Today, there's not a single city that you don't go and Uber is the transportation that we use, and the same thing is going to happen with crypto, and the same thing is going to happen with electric vehicles, and the same thing is going to happen with AI-driven companies. If you decide to play the long run.
Great. Marcelo, thanks so much for this conversation. Hope you recover soon.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, and apologies for not making it again.
Thank you. All right. Yes, I think he deserves some clapping. Thank you. Let's go to the rest of the panelists. I want to introduce them now, please. We have here Grace Smith from Marriott, and Lambert Loomis from Boeing. And also we have virtually Margaret Myers from the Inter-American Dialogue. She's going to join us. Hi, Margaret. How are you?
Good to see you.
Let me start with you, Craig. Talking about the economy and the recovery, there is an incredible sector, which is tourism, where you see a lot of what happened during the pandemic, right? What are your thoughts here? What is the recovery? How is the recovery going?
So us, the airlines and the cruise ships, we dipped we lost 90% of our sales at one point. It was a miserable time period. And today, it's hard to wipe the smile off my face. Life is good. It's coming back. It's coming back faster than we've ever seen. When we see recovery, it's just the curve's almost straight up. And so it's a good time. It started with leisure travel. It bled into this thing called leisure travel, where people would stay for 2 days of work and finish with 2 days of vacation on the back end. And now we're seeing corporate travel back, group travel coming back also.
Do you have any numbers, any figures?
I can tell you trends.
Oh, trends.
So,
yes.
and I think probably the main point is that when we take the friction out of travel, things happen. So our business in, let's take Europe, for example, London, or UK and Europe, is when business came back, it came back slowly, but as soon as they got rid of the last health requirements, it came back with a wham. And so I think just today what we're seeing are numbers where we're 40, 50% above the booking pace above pre-pandemic. And so it's coming back very fast. And then we have areas that we didn't lose, that we had no restrictions during COVID. Take the Maldives or Cancun, they had banner years. They did better than they've ever done.
And then obviously Boeing is linked to this. How are things for you, especially for the MAX series? How is that recovery going?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember kind of where we were in March of 2020 to even begin to answer the question of where we are today. In March of 2020, total passenger traffic in the world was down 95% globally. That's never happened. If you ever had an issue before, it was kind of localized in a specific region. And as an industry, you could kind of compensate, where in one region it would be affected, in another it would be rebounding. Not the case, obviously, with COVID. So from that negative point, what we've seen is that the effects on our region here in Latin America were particularly strong. Obviously the region was very affected. And in fact, if you look at the total number of air passenger seat availability, the total capacity of aviation traffic went into bankruptcy, the highest percentage of any region was here in Latin America, higher than Africa, higher than Southeast Asia. And that's because, as we saw in other presentations, the economic impact in terms of GDP here in the region was very strong, and that was coupled with lack of support from government. That combination put a lot of the companies, across the region into bankruptcy. And that was a key issue that defined the early stages of COVID. Where we are today is actually in a much better spot. I think as a result of the flexibility that bankruptcy allowed, the result of a lot of changes that the airlines made, that companies like Boeing helped them through the transition to accelerate the adoption of more efficient aircraft, for example, the MAX, which you asked about, has positioned them to grow. And what we see going forward, Boeing does our current market outlook, and we look out to 2040. The estimated market for Latin America is $535 billion between now and 2040. So this is a huge market, and the key driver of the growth for that market in our sector is about the regional interconnectivity. So the largest component of growth that we expect to see that drives passenger traffic is going to be the way to which South America connects with itself. That's, I think, an exciting trend for all of us to consider and explore, and I think will have impacts on other industries as well.
That's where Miami and also Panama dominate, by both of them kind of being hubs.
Right? Margaret, you're an expert on China and LATAM relations. We heard in the first panel a lot of different views about how Latin America should integrate and negotiate itself with the rest of the world. I want to hear your thoughts on what is the moment now for the Chinese-LATAM relations?
You know, this is a really fascinating moment for China-Latin America relations. I like to say that China-Latin America relations are evolving in three very specific ways. One is we're seeing a sort of tapering of overall economic engagement. That doesn't mean China's leaving by any means, but a tapering in the overall numbers. Trade continues to grow and to underpin the relationship as it has for a couple of decades now, but we've seen a sort of drop off in certain types of investment, especially greenfield projects, over the past few years, and also specifically and rather remarkably in the area of sovereign lending, where we really don't see very much activity at all. We'll see something of an uptick probably in 2022, but have seen no lending whatsoever for the past 2 years in Latin America. So a real sort of, I would say, tapering again. And then accompanying that is something of a focusing of overall activity. And so there, we see a focus on what China tends to call new infrastructure. And those are sectors, industries that are related largely to innovation and high tech. And indeed, anyone in Latin America now knows that China has developed a really extensive presence in these areas, in wide-ranging sectors across the region, whether we're talking about, just selling Lenovo computers or delivering smart grids and smart cities, safe cities technologies, other AI-based technologies, cloud computing, really, you name it. And these are indeed the areas where China is focusing very specifically at present in order to be able to address some of its own concerns at home about its ability to grow well into the future. And then a third area is localization. And I think maybe this is to be expected, but we're seeing not just engagement at the national level, right, bilateral level, which was a feature of the relationship early on, but really local engagement, whether we're talking about with states and provincial officials or at the municipal level, and not just with capital cities, but of cities of 200,000 people or less in certain cases to achieve certain objectives, most of them commercial in nature. So a real change in the way things are happening.
I want to ask Craig and Landon about the political scene. But first, remember, we have a poll that you can participate through our app. The question that we have on the poll today is, why has Latin American's growth lagged so far behind Southeast Asia? We have three options. You can see them on the screen: a legacy of populism and political volatility, poor infrastructure, or the high cost of capital. So if you want to use your apps, please to participate in the poll. And also, if you have questions for our panelists, we'll be happy to read them. So, great.
We have two of us on stage. You lived in Asia before. So
okay, so what is the difference you see from the political, approach? We see a lot of governments are like sincerely not, let's say, anti-business, or they don't love business in the region. What is your take on this? Is that a factor in your business?
Yeah, you don't have to love business, and I think back 200 years ago when I was in school, and you read Adam Smith talking about competitiveness of nations, right? What countries and governments need to know today is that they should wake up like I do every morning saying, who's my competitor and how am I going to compete? And I don't know that that's the countries that win are the ones that do that. And Southeast Asia has done a very good job saying, where are we competitive? Where can we win? And how are we going to grow that side of our business? We do the same thing as companies. Latin America needs to do the same thing. It's where can we win? There is a trade war kind of going on between the United States and China. Those factories are going to move somewhere. They're either going to move to Southeast Asia or they're going to move to Latin America. There's a huge upside in tourism. Tourism is an export. Someone brings foreign currency to your country and they buy something here today. That's a huge opportunity, and Latin America has a competitive advantage there. The question is, are they going to take the friction out of it? And are we going to look at it as a group and individually say, how can we win in this area? And how can we be competitive?
Amnon?
Yeah, I think that it's important that we can talk about what the impact of business is. So while there may be political opinions about business in general, I think everyone would agree that the 7.6 million jobs that the aviation sector creates are important. The $187 billion of economic activity we generate are important. And that appeals to any politician of any stripe. But not just that. You think about the surge of low-cost carriers that have come up kind of as COVID has receded. We see across the region a surge in new carriers who are coming up offering ticketing prices at a lower level. If you can change the cost of something, then you change what it means. If you can take, we've got customers in the Caribbean who are looking to cut the cost of a flight in half. If you are able to do that, then you change what it means to fly. You make it a more democratic, experience. And I think that sort of, impact that businesses have by focusing on cost and efficiency, working with government partners who often have to help in that process, then what we can do is change what we are doing and even the social impacts of our enterprise.
I think we have the results of the poll already. Let's see if we can see them. There you are. Oh, what a surprise. Complete agreement, a legacy of populism and political stability. Certainly, sometimes you feel that governments want to have the cake and eat it in the region, right? Like they want to have the points that you are saying, Landon, in terms of creating jobs and investment, but at the same time, they don't want to set the rules that will allow for those jobs to happen.
Right? Can I add one thing there?
Go for it.
It's not about just creating jobs, it's about upscaling jobs. So I checked in last night to our JW Marriott here in Panama City. The general manager there, he started off in banquets. So, where does that happen? And so when we're selling to governments, even if they're this quote unquote anti-business, we're saying we're creating jobs, we're upscaling the jobs. There's a lot of good that's coming about from allowing us to come and work in your country.
And just one quick comment just about comparing Latin America to Southeast Asia. So the big economies that matter in our industry, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, they have the same GDP per capita as Malaysia and Thailand, but they have half as much passenger traffic per GDP. So they have twice as much GDP as Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and yet they have the same amount of passenger traffic per GDP, which means that it's not just a question of GDP. We have to work on the connectivity in the region, that issue itself. And I think it's we see that not just in travel patterns, we see that politically, trade agreements, the sort of macro infrastructure that ties the region together is more strengthened. It's more a defining feature of Southeast Asia than it is in Latin America. And that inefficiency is a barrier that I think, if it were resolved, would generate benefits across the board.
Margaret, given this comparison between Latin America and Southeast Asia, you want to add anything from an academic perspective?
I mean, I think that bringing in the question of nearshoring is kind of interesting in this particular sense too, right? Of course, a lot of what's happening there's a lot happening, as Mauricio pointed out earlier, right? And a lot of prospect there, but a lot of it's being captured by Southeast Asia, and to a degree in Latin America, specifically by Mexico. And so, I do see this continues to be mentioned, whether in the context of the Summit of the Americas is maybe a central theme, or by, on the Hill here in the US, or by wide-ranging international organizations or international development banks that are committed to making this happen as a promising, potential area of focus. And yet there is still much to be done in the Latin American region, and for many of the reasons that have already been mentioned by the panelists, to make the region attractive to these investments. And that's really all I would say about that. But might I make one just quick note? I think it's worth noting, and I see this is also something of an impediment to the sort of large-scale policymaking that would be facilitating of nearshoring, addressing a lot of these inefficiencies. And perhaps it's an unfair judgment, and I leave it to my panelists to sort of refute this claim. But, it's my sense, having had many conversations about this in the region, that there's an enduring belief in many places that China will be there for countries really for the duration. And a critical factor in addressing pandemic-related economic challenges. And I think that may very well be the case, right, if all goes well domestically in China. And for the time being, China would appear fully committed to advancing its position in sectors deemed of critical import to China's own growth. But of course, China's might and remarkable and sustained resilience is not always clear. Despite all of that, it's not always clear how things will develop a decade from now. And the Belt and Road itself, as we've mentioned, is already evolving in some very critical ways. So China, the U.S.-China competition is a factor shaping a lot of this. So will be China's own economic development, as we all know.
Margaret, let me ask you there, in terms of nearshoring, right? Like, you feel China will be worried about this? Because we speak everywhere. That's, probably one of the number one issues especially in Mexico, you speak to Mexican officials, they really they see this opportunity. But for China, is this really a worry, given the situation they are in with COVID and with political situation there?
It's kind of unclear how extensive this process will be at present. There are plenty of anecdotal examples that many people, point to when they want to talk about, progress already in the area of nearshoring or friendshoring, as it's been termed here in the U.S. to a degree. But there are a lot of companies, companies have different calculations, those that are based in China and doing manufacturing or selling to Chinese markets. And some of them are, far more able to and inclined to move elsewhere and to make capital investments elsewhere. Others will not, despite the challenges associated with doing business right now in China, which in many cases are mounting. So, it largely depends on who it is and just how extensive, the costs will be associated with this. So I think, as was mentioned earlier, the next, year or two will be very telling in this respect. On the other hand, you have a lot of Chinese companies, right, that are also taking advantage of this potential phenomenon. And there's been a huge uptick this year in Chinese companies heading to Mexico looking for opportunities in manufacturing and other sectors.
You wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd see Mexico competing more with Indonesia and with Vietnam than with China right now. And I think that's where, as far as for manufacturing, I think for tourism, which is just as fluid, it's an open game for the world right now.
So go for it.
Yeah, I just want to highlight a couple of ways in which Latin America can contribute from a point of strength and leadership. They have a lot of resources that are useful and competitive from a global perspective, and I think there's an opportunity to lean into some of them. So, for example, Mexico graduates more engineers than Germany. A fact I learned on a recent trip. You've got great engineering expertise in Brazil, in Colombia, and elsewhere. So there are pockets of expertise which are important today, because today the market for that talent is so tight. So there you have companies with a global reach or perspective are looking everywhere for that sort of talent, and we're certainly among them. I think beyond that, you also have just the supply chain itself. We have $1 billion supply chain impact in Mexico. It's one of our top 5 suppliers in the world, and we in this environment we can continue to grow that. But beyond that, as we think about the role that e-commerce has played through the pandemic, it's transformed cargo aviation, and that then supplies 90% of the total cargo capacity in the world, has meant that we've had to open new cargo conversion plants. And where did we open our first one in the pandemic? Here in the region, next door in Costa Rica. And the last third point I'll say, which is a topic I think that is also important where Latin America can lead, is sustainability. So as we talk about how we're going to decarbonize aviation, the most important, there's a multi-pronged approach. We have to do all of it. The biggest, most important element of that approach is sustainable aviation fuels. And the question is, where does the feedstock come from to ramp up production of that fuel? Latin America is privileged in its, kind of materia prima, in its raw materials that could feed into that solution. So whether you're talking about supply chain manufacturing, engineering, sustainability, there are important stories to develop here that really aren't about China. They're about Latin America.
So you see an opportunity there because Boeing has a massive research center in Brazil. You have all these suppliers in Mexico. Is it real nearshoring for you guys in Mexico, for instance?
It's just good supply chain global presence building, right? So nearshoring it's closer to the United States, but it's really actually about taking seriously the opportunity to develop a value proposition that exists in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, here in Panama. These relationships, these are smaller countries, but the contribution they can make isn't just about serving the domestic market. They can become an effective part of a global approach and a global strategy. And so I think that's the lesson that we've learned through the pandemic, through the disruptions to the supply chains. You have to have a resilient global approach to your, not just to where you're going to sell your products, but how you're going to build your capability.
Craig, you mentioned that obviously Latin America has a great opportunity in tourism. It's a competitive advantage. I'm based in Mexico City. It's incredible, the boom of tourism that you see, not only on the coast, obviously, Cancun and all these places, also in Mexico City, in Condesa, in Roma, in all these places. But what are you doing about it? What are you guys investing in?
We're building. What are you building? We're building all along. So you take what started as Cancun became the Riviera Maya. What started as Puerto Vallarta became the Riviera Nayarit. The whole both coasts are going up and down. We met with Governor of Puebla not Puebla, but Oaxaca. They're building roads now. There's more going on there. There's a lot going on in this area. And so a city is the same thing, our cities. And so our expansion in Latin America, we have 300 hotels in Latin America. We have 100 signed contracts that are under development. And we've got more coming that we'll be signing this year. And so we're really bullish about the region as far as travel goes. And think also the fact that you've got a very young demographic, right? So the one thing that China doesn't have is this, and India has, and Latin America has, is this growing young population. That young population, they're tech savvy, they want to grow, they want to move, they're not happy just to stay in one place. It's going to be a game changer if we're talking about the long run.
So 300, another 100 coming?
300.
300?
300.
That's another 100 coming?
At least.
At least. So in 3-4 years, would you say how many properties?
Well, our goal obviously is to be the more than double in 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
And you know, pre-pandemic, tour and travel, and this is a great thing for both of us, was beating GDP in almost every single country. We're seeing it coming back at the same rate. So we see travel coming back quickly. I've had all sorts of experts get on TV and say, no one's going to travel, they're going to use Zoom. I'm like, really? Are you going to use Zoom when your competitor flies across the world and sits down and meets with a client face-to-face? And this is Latin America. Where do you do work? You do work over a meal. You talk family, football, and then you talk about work. You can't do that over Zoom.
We also heard about the end of the business travel, right?
Yeah, that's not happening. I can tell you from our statistics now, not happening.
Margaret, let me go back to politics a little bit. You mentioned before the Summit of the Americas, right? And we saw, a little bit of back and forth between the White House, Mexico, Brazil. We are just a few weeks from that event, and we still don't have confirmations. How is China reacting to all of this? Are they looking at this with pleasure? Maybe, It's an opportunity for
It's certainly been portrayed in the international media as a boon there was a recent article, I think maybe today, that came out describing it as a boon for China, which, has held some summits in the region just very recently. There was a Caribbean summit that was evidently very successful, and then also the China CELAC Forum, which is, a regional platform of China's own design that took place this past December, and, an articulated wide-ranging new vision for the region. So when you hold those two, that in contrast with what's happening right now, with the Summit of the Americas and a sort of last-minute effort to really pull this together despite a lot of concerns about major leaders, presidents not attending, there is a sort of stark contrast that one could easily paint. I can't imagine that China is sad about how things are going at this particular juncture at the Summit of the Americas, but I'm hopeful that in these next 2 weeks, the agenda can be solidified and at least focused to identify areas of considerable concern and shared interest, right, among those who do attend.
We certainly all are. Listen, we have 3 minutes. I'm going to ask you a quick question to all of you. Craig, let me ask you about inflation. How that is a problem. We have the region with the highest inflation this year, around 15% expected. Is that a problem for businesses?
We were worrying about it. It's affecting us more on building costs.
Mm-hmm.
We were worried about it as far as travel goes, and we haven't seen the effect yet. I mean, our rates are, because of demand, the rates have gone up, which has been positive, but it hasn't affected people traveling. It's affected building costs.
Landon, in terms of the MAX, Go was the first company to reoperate the plane. How is it going in Latin America?
Yeah, it's going great. I mean, honestly, the story of the MAX in Latin America has been, it's just demonstrated the importance of this region to our company. ANAC was the first international regulator to unground the MAX. Go was the first, as you said, to put it back into revenue service. Since then, at the end of 2019, we've had more than 1 million flight hours, 400,000 flights, 189 regulators around the world have all approved, to put the MAX back in the air. And honestly, to me, that is what a Boeing fix to a problem looks like. You ground an entire fleet of aircraft around the world for 2 years, and when you bring it back, the schedule reliability rate of that aircraft 1 million times is 99.4%. That's what Boeing quality looks like. And I think, honestly, as difficult as that experience was for us, this region played an important role in helping us demonstrate what it looks like when we come back.
Margaret, for you, my last question is, which would you consider the biggest success of China in the region? Where is China really influential in Latin America?
I think probably if you asked me each year, I would say something different. But this year, and last, even amid the pandemic, there has been sort of accompanying or related to this process of localization an absolute explosion of diplomatic activity across, at varied levels.
And this includes, these sort of multilateral platforms that have been established. Also, extensive bilateral activity has been the case for a very long time, but really efforts to engage with and cultivate networks at the very, very localist of levels, which I think, in some cases are very targeted and intended to achieve very specific commercial objectives. In some cases are not, and are simply looking to establish these networks to the extent that they'll be productive, maybe a decade from now. And I do think that this will significantly expand China's overall presence in the region in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Margaret, Landon, Craig. Thank you. A round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you. All right, I have a lot of housekeeping items for you. Bear with me, it's a bit long list, right? So up next, we have lunch break. We will reconvene back here for the afternoon plenary session at 2:40, okay? Lunch will be served upstairs in the Pacifica restaurant. For those of you who have signed up to attend breakout sessions, please follow the signage posting towards end roundtable session. We have an excellent program this afternoon covering central bank digital currencies, supply chains, and the populist landscape. Please return promptly so as not to miss out. You can see the full session and the agenda via the Bloomberg New Economic mobile app. For those interested, Panamá now invites you to sample local fruits and handmade chocolates in the host partner lounge. That's a key thing. Panamá host partner lounge. This evening, we have the gala dinner taking place at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I hope see you there, where President Cortizo will be interviewed by Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders. All right, I think that covers it all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.